saved the kids I was babysitting, and now I can't look at myself in the mirror. The sound of glass shattering came from somewhere downstairs, and I froze on the couch with the TV remote in my hand. It was 10 at night, and I was babysitting 2 kids in a house I'd only been inside once before today. The parents had left for their anniversary dinner at 6 and given me the fastest tour of the house I'd ever experienced. Leo and Ava were both asleep in their rooms. I muted the TV and sat completely still listening. I heard heavy footsteps moving through what sounded like the kitchen. Then I heard men's voices and my stomach dropped. "Kitchen window was open. Told you this would be easy," one of them said. My whole body went cold and I grabbed my phone off the coffee table. I ran for the stairs as quietly as I could. I burst into Leo's room and shook him awake as gently as I could while still being urgent. "We need to hide right now, and I need you not to ask any questions." His eyes went wide, but he got out of bed without saying anything. We ran down the hall to Ava's room and I scooped her up out of her bed. She immediately started crying and I put my hand gently over her mouth. "Shh, we're playing a game where we have to be completely silent, okay?" I whispered. I could hear the men's footsteps getting louder as they came up the stairs. I looked around frantically, trying to remember the layout of the house from the quick tour. The master bedroom was at the end of the hall, and it was the biggest room with the most places to hide. I pulled both kids down the hallway and into the master bedroom, closing and locking the door behind us. "Get in that closet right now and go all the way to the back behind the clothes," I whispered. Leo grabbed his sister's hand and they crawled into the walk-in closet. I followed them in and pulled the closet door shut behind us. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold my phone as I tried to unlock it. The battery icon showed 2%. I opened my messages and typed out a text to 911 with the address and pressed send. The screen went black immediately, and the phone died. Through the bedroom door, I could hear the men in the hallway opening and closing doors. "Check every room," one of them said. "The safe is supposed to be in the master bedroom." The door handle to the master bedroom started rattling violently. "This one's locked," someone said. Something heavy slammed against the door and I heard the wood starting to splinter. Ava grabbed my hand and her whole body was shaking. The door crashed open with a loud bang and I heard their footsteps coming into the room. "Check the closet," one of them said. I felt around desperately on the shelf above me in the pitch darkness. My hand closed around something heavy and metal that felt like a bookend or a statue. The closet door started to open slowly, and light from the bedroom spilled in. A man's silhouette appeared in the doorway. Behind him I could see 2 more men standing in the bedroom. He reached into the closet and grabbed my arm hard. "Come on out of there right now," he said. Leo started crying and the man looked past me at the kids. "Get the kids too," another man yelled from behind him. I swung the heavy metal object down on the man's head as hard as I possibly could. He staggered backward and blood started pouring down his face immediately. He touched his head and looked at his hand covered in blood. Then he lunged at me with this rage in his eyes and grabbed me by the throat. I couldn't breathe and I hit him again with the bookend. He loosened his grip but didn't let go completely. He shoved me hard against the closet door frame and I felt pain shoot through my back. "You little bitch," he said through gritted teeth. I brought my knee up into his stomach and when he doubled over, I hit him across the face with the bookend as hard as I could. He fell to the floor but immediately tried to get back up. I kept swinging down on him over and over and he was trying to grab my legs to pull me down with him. The other 2 men started moving toward me and I was screaming at the top of my lungs. I kept hitting him even after his hands stopped reaching for me, and he went completely still. Blood was spraying everywhere and getting all over my hands and clothes and face. "Stay away from us or you're next," I screamed at the other men. They looked down at their friend lying motionless on the ground with blood pooling around his head and spreading across the carpet. Then they looked at me standing there covered in blood and still holding the bookend up like I was ready to use it again. They turned around and ran out of the room without saying a word. I heard them crashing down the stairs and then a door slamming somewhere below. I dropped the bookend on the floor and it landed with a heavy thud. I looked down at what I'd done and the man wasn't moving at all. There was so much blood everywhere that I couldn't tell where it was all coming from. I turned around and Leo and Ava were pressed against the back wall of the closet, staring at me with absolute terror in their eyes, like I was the monster who'd come to hurt them. I stood there frozen with the bookend still in my hand, and my whole body started shaking so hard I thought I might fall over. Sirens were getting louder outside, and I could hear them coming down the street getting closer and closer. The 2 men who ran away were gone, and the house felt completely silent except for Leo and Ava crying somewhere behind me in the closet. I wanted to turn around and tell them it was okay, but I couldn't move, and I couldn't stop staring at the man on the floor who wasn't moving anymore. The front door crashed open downstairs, and I heard heavy boots running through the house. Multiple voices were shouting commands, but I couldn't understand what they were saying because everything sounded far away and muffled. I dropped the bookend and it hit the carpet with a soft thud that seemed too quiet for something so heavy. My hands went up in the air even though they were covered in blood, and I didn't know if I was supposed to put them up or not. Officers rushed up the stairs with guns pointed at me, and I opened my mouth to explain, but no words came out. My throat felt closed up and tight like someone was still choking me even though nobody was touching me anymore. An officer was shouting something about getting on the ground, but I just stood there with my hands up because I couldn't make my legs work. Another officer moved past me quickly and knelt down next to the man on the floor checking for a pulse. A female officer came toward me slowly with her hands out in front of her like she was approaching a dangerous animal. She asked if I was hurt, and I shook my head, but I couldn't stop looking at all the blood on my hands. It was drying now and turning dark and sticky, and I could see it on my clothes and feel it on my face. The carpet around us was soaked through with blood, and it had spread out in a dark pool that was still growing. The officer kept asking me questions, but I couldn't focus on her words because I was watching the other officer check the man's neck and wrist for a pulse. He looked up at the female officer and shook his head and said something into his radio. More officers came into the room, and one of them went straight to the closet where Leo and Ava were still crying. He pulled them out gently, but they started screaming when they saw me standing there. Ava was reaching away from me with both hands like she was trying to get as far from me as possible. The officer picked them both up and carried them toward the door quickly. I could hear Ava crying and saying something over and over as they went down the stairs. No, her voice was high and scared, and she kept saying the scary lady hurt him. Leo was crying too, but he wasn't making any sounds, and his eyes were huge and fixed on me like he couldn't look away. They disappeared down the stairs, and I felt something crack inside my chest. A woman in a dark suit came up the stairs, and all the other officers seemed to step back when she walked into the room. She looked around at everything quickly, and then focused on me. She told the other officers to clear the hallway, and then she took my arm gently and led me out of the bedroom. We sat down on the floor in the hallway, and she said her name was Detective Kuznetsov. She asked me to explain what happened, and I tried to talk, but the words came out wrong and jumbled. I was describing the break-in and the closet, and the man grabbing me, but it sounded like I was talking about something that happened to someone else in a movie I watched. My voice didn't sound like my voice, and I kept losing track of what I was saying. Detective Kuznetsov didn't rush me or get impatient, and she just waited while I tried to put the pieces together in the right order. Paramedics came up the stairs with a stretcher and equipment, and they went into the bedroom. I could hear them working and talking to each other in calm, professional voices. They were in there for several minutes doing something to the man on the floor. When they came back out, they were pushing the stretcher, and he was on it with tubes and wires attached to him. His face was covered in blood, and there were bandages on his head. They moved past me quickly, and I got a clear look at his face for the first time. He looked younger than I expected, maybe in his 20s, and there was so much blood everywhere. His eyes were closed, and his skin was gray, and I couldn't tell if he was breathing. The paramedics carried him down the stairs fast, and I heard them going out the front door. 2 people came running up the stairs and pushed past the officers. It was Siobhan and Elliot, and they looked around frantically. Siobhan asked where her kids were, and an officer pointed downstairs. They both ran down without looking at me. I could hear voices downstairs, and then Siobhan asking where their babysitter was. Leo's voice came through clearly, and he said she's the one who hurt the bad man. His tone made my stomach twist, and I felt sick. An officer came over and asked me to stand up. He took photos of my hands from different angles and then my clothes. He photographed the blood on my face and neck. When he was done, he told me I could wash up in the bathroom down the hall. I walked to the bathroom and turned on the sink. The water ran over my hands and turned pink and then red as the blood came off. I scrubbed hard, trying to get it all off, but it was stuck under my fingernails and in the creases of my palms. I kept my eyes down on the sink, watching the pink water swirl down the drain. There was a mirror above the sink, but I didn't look up at it. I couldn't look at my own face right now. I washed until the water ran clear and my hands were red and raw from scrubbing. Siobhan came upstairs with Elliot behind her. She walked toward me carefully and slowly, like she wasn't sure if I was safe to approach. She thanked me for protecting Leo and Ava, but her voice sounded scared and shaky. She said she didn't know what would have happened if I hadn't been there. Elliot asked if I was okay, but he stayed several feet away from me. I could see him looking past me at the blood-soaked carpet and the bookend still lying on the floor where I dropped it. Detective Kuznetsov came over and asked Siobhan and Elliot to take the children to a neighbor's house. She said she needed to interview me properly without the kids around. Siobhan nodded, and they went back downstairs. I heard them gathering up Leo and Ava and heading for the front door. Right before they left, Leo looked back up the stairs at me. His face was pure fear and not gratitude or relief. He looked at me like I was the monster who came to hurt them, and something inside me broke completely. Detective Kuznetsov came back upstairs and asked me to sit down in the hallway outside the bedroom so she could take my full statement. I sat on the floor with my back against the wall, and she pulled out a small recording device and set it on the carpet between us. She told me she was going to record everything, and I just nodded. Crime scene investigators moved in and out of the bedroom behind us, taking photographs and marking things with little yellow numbered cards. The flashes from their cameras kept going off, and I could see them through the doorway measuring blood patterns on the carpet and walls. Detective Kuznetsov asked me to start from the beginning and tell her everything that happened. I described hearing the glass break downstairs and getting Leo and Ava and hiding in the closet. My voice sounded flat and distant, like I was reading from a script. I told her about the men breaking down the bedroom door and coming into the room and opening the closet. I described the man grabbing my arm and reaching for the kids and how I hit him with the bookend. She asked me to be as specific as possible about what happened next. I explained that he grabbed my throat and I hit him again, and he shoved me against the door frame. I told her I kept hitting him because he kept trying to get up and grab me, and I was afraid he would hurt the children if I stopped. She asked how many times I hit him, and I said I didn't know. I really couldn't remember. It happened so fast, and I was just swinging over and over until he stopped moving. One of the investigators came out of the bedroom and showed Detective Kuznetsov something on his tablet. She looked at it and nodded and then turned back to me. Detective Kuznetsov asked me why I kept hitting him after he fell to the floor. Her voice wasn't mean or accusing, but the question made me feel sick. I told her I was scared he would get back up. I said he kept trying to grab my legs even when he was down, and I thought if I stopped, he would pull me down with him. She wrote something in her notebook and asked if I felt like I was in danger the entire time. I said yes. I said the whole time I was hitting him, I could see the other two men standing there and I thought they would come at me next. She asked if the other men tried to stop me or help their friend. And I said no. I said they just watched. And then they ran when they saw all the blood. Detective Kuznetsov asked if I said anything to the other men, and I remembered screaming at them to stay away. She wrote that down too. She asked me to describe my physical condition during the attack, and I didn't understand what she meant. She explained that she needed to know if I was injured or if anything limited my ability to defend myself. I told her about the man choking me and shoving me into the doorframe, and my back hurt from that. She made notes about everything, and I could tell she was paying attention to every single detail about what I did and why I did it. My parents showed up just after midnight, and I heard them downstairs talking to officers in loud, worried voices. My dad came running up the stairs and saw me sitting in the hallway. He rushed over and tried to pull me into a hug, but I jerked away from him before he could touch me. He looked hurt and confused and asked if I was okay. I said I was fine. My mom came up right behind him and she was crying and asking if I was injured. I kept saying I was fine over and over, but my voice didn't sound convincing. My mom knelt down next to me and reached for my hands, but I pulled them back. I didn't want anyone touching me. Detective Kuznetsov stood up and asked my parents to give us a few more minutes to finish. My dad said they wanted to take me home right now, and the detective said she understood, but this was important. My mom kept staring at the blood on my clothes and hands and face. She asked if that was my blood, and I said no. She started crying harder, and my dad put his arm around her shoulders. An officer asked them to wait downstairs, and they went back down reluctantly. My dad kept looking back at me like he didn't want to leave me alone. Detective Kuznetsov finished taking my statement and then asked my parents to come back upstairs. She pulled them aside to the other end of the hallway, and I could hear parts of what she was saying. She told them the intruder was in critical condition at the hospital. She said depending on what happened with him, I might face charges. The word charges hit me like a physical blow. My dad asked what kind of charges, and Detective Kuznetsov said it was too early to say, but the district attorney would review everything. She explained that self-defense has limits, and they had to investigate whether the force I used was reasonable. My mom said I was protecting children, and Detective Kuznetsov agreed, but said the law was complicated. She said the fact that I kept hitting him after he was down could be seen as excessive. My dad's voice got louder, and he said I was a teenager defending myself and two small children from grown men who broke into a house. Detective Kuznetsov stayed calm and said she understood, but she had to follow procedure. She said the investigation would take time and they would look at all the evidence. The whole conversation felt wrong and backward. I saved Leo and Ava from dangerous criminals, and now I was the one being investigated like I did something wrong. Detective Kuznetsov came back over and said I could go home with my parents around 2 a.m. She told me I needed to stay available for more questions and not leave town. My dad said we weren't going anywhere. She gave my parents her card and said to call if I remembered anything else. An officer walked us downstairs and out to my parents' car in the driveway. There were still police cars everywhere with their lights flashing. Some neighbors stood on their porches watching. I got in the back seat and my parents got in front. Nobody said anything. My dad started the car and we pulled away from the house. My mom cried quietly in the passenger seat and wiped her eyes with tissues. My dad gripped the steering wheel so tight his knuckles were white. I stared out the window at the dark houses going past. The drive home took 15 minutes and nobody spoke the entire time. When we pulled into our driveway, my mom turned around and asked if I wanted something to eat. I said no. She asked if I wanted to take a shower and I said no. My dad asked if I wanted to talk and I said no. They both looked at each other like they didn't know what to do with me. I went straight to my room and closed the door. I sat on my bed still wearing the bloody clothes. I knew I should take them off and shower, but I couldn't make myself move. I just sat there staring at nothing. Around 3 a.m, I lay down and closed my eyes. Immediately I saw the intruder's face covered in blood. I opened my eyes fast. I tried again, and this time I heard the sound of the bookend hitting him. The heavy thud sound repeated in my head. I tried one more time and felt his hands around my throat squeezing. I sat up, breathing hard. My heart was racing and my hands were shaking. I gave up on sleeping and just sat there in the dark. I watched the clock on my nightstand change from 3 to 4 to 5 in the morning. When the sun started coming up, I was still sitting in the same position wearing the same bloody clothes. I stared at the wall across from my bed and didn't think about anything. I heard my parents moving around outside my door around 6 a.m. They were trying to be quiet, but I could hear them whispering to each other. My mom's voice kept breaking like she was crying. My dad's voice was low and serious. I heard him say something about calling a lawyer. My mom said something about therapy. They went downstairs and I heard my dad on the phone in the kitchen. His voice carried up through the floor. He was talking to someone about legal representation for a minor. He said his daughter was involved in a self-defense situation. He gave details about what happened and asked about the person's experience with these kinds of cases. My mom was crying in the kitchen and I could hear her even though she was trying to be quiet. She kept saying she didn't know what to do. My dad finished his phone call and I heard him trying to comfort her. He said we would get through this. He said I did what I had to do. My mom said she knew that, but she was scared about what would happen next. 3 days went by in a blur. I barely left my room. My parents brought me food, but I only ate a little. My mom took time off work to stay home with me. On the 3rd day, my dad said he needed to run some errands and asked if I would be okay alone with my mom for an hour. The second he said that, my chest got tight. I couldn't breathe right. My vision started going dark around the edges. I felt like I was back in that closet with the men breaking down the door. My mom noticed something was wrong and rushed over. She asked what was happening and I couldn't answer. I was gasping for air, but it felt like no oxygen was getting in. My hands and feet started tingling. My mom grabbed my shoulders and told me to breathe slowly. My dad canceled his errands and stayed home. It took 20 minutes before I could breathe normally again. My mom called it a panic attack. She said we should talk to a doctor. I just nodded because I couldn't explain that I was convinced someone was breaking in again the moment my dad mentioned leaving. After that, my mom didn't leave me alone at all. She stayed home from work completely. She sat in the living room while I was in my room. She followed me to the bathroom and waited outside the door. I hated that I needed her there, but I couldn't handle being by myself. Every sound in the house made me jump. A branch hitting the window, the refrigerator making ice, the furnace turning on. Each noise sent my heart racing and made me check over my shoulder. I started checking all the locks on the doors and windows constantly. I would check the front door, and then 5 minutes later I had to check it again to make sure. My mom watched me do this over and over, but she didn't try to stop me. My dad put extra locks on all the doors and windows. He installed a new security system with cameras. Nothing made me feel safer. A week after everything happened, a man named Isaac Perkins came to our house. My dad said he was a defense attorney. Isaac sat down in our living room with a leather briefcase. He wore a suit and looked very professional. He shook my hand and told me he specialized in self-defense cases. He opened his briefcase and took out a legal pad and pen. He explained that he needed to understand exactly what happened, so he could represent me properly if charges were filed. His voice was calm and matter-of-fact. He asked me questions about the break-in and the attack, and I answered them. He took notes the whole time. He didn't act sympathetic or worried. He treated me like I was a client with a legal problem that needed solving. He didn't ask how I was feeling or if I was okay. He just wanted facts and details. Somehow that made everything feel worse. I wasn't a scared teenager who went through something horrible. I was a case, a legal situation. Someone who might need defending in court because I protected 2 children from criminals. Isaac pulled out a folder from his briefcase and opened it on the coffee table. He pointed to a section of text and started explaining legal concepts in a way that made everything feel worse instead of better. Self-defense had to match the level of threat someone faced. The person defending themselves couldn't use more force than necessary to stop the danger. He said prosecutors sometimes argued that continuing to hit someone after they went down crossed a line from defense into something else. The phrase he used was excessive force. Hearing those words made my throat tight and my hands start shaking again. I wasn't trying to use excessive anything. I was trying to stay alive and keep 2 kids safe from men who broke into their house. Isaac kept talking about legal standards and reasonable person tests and how juries evaluated these situations. None of it made sense to me because I couldn't imagine any reasonable person standing in that closet, making calculated decisions about how many times to swing a bookend. My mom asked Isaac what would happen next, and he said we had to wait for the detective to schedule a formal interview. He told my parents he would be present for any questioning and that I shouldn't talk to police without him there. My dad asked how long the investigation would take, and Isaac said it could be weeks or even months depending on how thorough they wanted to be. The idea of months of this hanging over me made me want to crawl into bed and never come out. Isaac left around noon and I went straight to my room. I heard my parents talking quietly downstairs, but I couldn't make out the words. My phone buzzed on my nightstand, but I didn't look at it. 3 days later, Detective Kuznetsov called my dad's cell phone. I was sitting on the couch when he answered, and I watched his face change as he listened. He said yes several times and wrote something down on a notepad. When he hung up, he told me and my mom that the detective wanted to schedule a formal interview at the police station. My dad called Isaac immediately and put him on speaker. Isaac said he would contact the detective to arrange a time when he could be present. They set it up for the following Tuesday, which meant I had 7 days to think about nothing, except going back to that police station and describing everything again. 7 days of waking up at night seeing the intruder's face. 7 days of checking locks and jumping at every sound. 7 days of my stomach twisting every time I remembered I had to sit in a room and talk about the worst thing that ever happened to me. The week dragged by in a strange way where time moved both too slowly and too fast. I barely left my room except to use the bathroom and force down food when my mom brought it upstairs. My friends texted asking if I wanted to hang out or if I was okay. I read the messages but didn't respond. What was I supposed to say? Sorry I can't meet up because I'm preparing to be interviewed about killing someone? My parents didn't push me to talk, but I saw them exchange worried looks whenever they checked on me. My mom took the whole week off work to stay home. She sat in the living room or kitchen where she could hear if I needed anything. My dad kept asking if there was anything he could do to help, and I kept saying no, because there wasn't anything anyone could do. Tuesday morning arrived and I got dressed in clothes my mom laid out for me. She picked a plain blue shirt and jeans that looked normal and not too casual or too formal. We drove to the police station with Isaac following in his own car. The building looked different in daylight than it had that first night. We parked and walked inside together. A uniformed officer led us down a hallway to a small room with no windows. Detective Kuznetsov was already there along with another detective I didn't recognize. There was a table in the center with chairs around it and a recording device sitting in the middle. Isaac sat next to me and my parents had to wait outside. Detective Kuznetsov explained that they were recording the interview and asked if I understood my rights. Isaac had already gone over this with me, so I said yes. She pressed a button on the recorder and stated the date and time and who was present in the room. Then she asked me to describe what happened on the night of the incident starting from the beginning. I started talking about hearing the glass break and hiding the kids in the closet. My voice sounded flat and mechanical, like I was reading from a script instead of describing real events. Halfway through explaining what happened in the bedroom, my vision started getting fuzzy around the edges. I kept talking, but it felt like I was watching myself from somewhere else in the room. I could see my mouth moving and hear words coming out, but I wasn't really there anymore. I was floating somewhere above the table, looking down at this girl sitting between Isaac and the detective. Isaac touched my arm gently and asked if I needed a break. I said no and kept going. I described hitting the intruder and him falling and me hitting him more times. I described the blood and the other men running away. I described dropping the bookend and seeing Leo and Ava pressed against the closet wall. The other detective slid a folder across the table and opened it. Inside were photographs of the master bedroom, close-up shots of blood patterns on the carpet, photos of the bookend lying on the floor covered in dark red stains, pictures of the intruder's injuries that showed damage I hadn't really seen that night because of all the blood. Isaac leaned forward and said something about whether these photos were necessary. Detective Kuznetsov said they needed me to confirm details about the scene. The other detective asked questions about my emotional state during the attack. He wanted to know if I felt angry or scared or out of control. Isaac objected to the way he phrased some questions, but I answered anyway. My voice stayed in that same flat tone that didn't sound like me at all. I said I felt terrified. I said I thought the intruder was going to kill me and hurt the children. I said I didn't remember feeling angry, just desperate to make him stop. Detective Kuznetsov pulled out another photo and placed it in front of me. She asked if I had ever seen the intruder before that night. I looked at the picture and said no. She asked if I was certain I had no prior contact with him. I said I was certain. I had never seen him before he opened that closet door. She showed me a different photo, one that looked like it came from social media or a driver's license. It showed the same man but clean and smiling in normal clothes. She asked again if I recognized him. I stared at his face, trying to match this regular-looking person with the man who grabbed my throat and tried to hurt two innocent kids. He looked young in the photo, maybe 25 or 26. He had dark hair and a nice smile. He looked like someone who might work at a store or go to college. He didn't look like a criminal or a monster. He just looked normal. I told Detective Kuznetsov I didn't recognize him from before. She put the photo back in the folder. The interview went on for 3 hours. They asked about every detail of that night. They asked about my relationship with Leo and Ava's family. They asked about my state of mind before the break-in and after it. They asked me to estimate how many times I hit the intruder, and I said I didn't know. Maybe 6 or 7 or 8 times. They asked why I kept hitting him after he fell. I said because he kept trying to grab me, and I was afraid he would get back up. By the end, my throat hurt from talking, and my whole body felt drained and hollow. Detective Kuznetsov turned off the recorder and said they would be in touch. Isaac stood up and guided me out of the room with his hand on my shoulder. My parents were waiting in the hallway, and my mom's eyes were red like she had been crying. Isaac walked us out to the parking lot and told my parents the detectives were thorough but professional. He said we just had to wait now for the district attorney to review everything and make a decision. My dad shook Isaac's hand and thanked him. Isaac said he would call as soon as he heard anything. Then he got in his car and drove away. The drive home was quiet. I sat in the back seat staring out the window at houses and trees passing by. When we got home, I went straight to my room and closed the door. I lay on my bed fully dressed and stared at the ceiling. I stayed there for the rest of the day and most of the next. My mom brought food that I barely touched. My dad knocked softly and asked if I wanted to talk, but I said no. Text messages kept coming from friends asking if I was okay and when I would be back at the school. I didn't answer any of them. I couldn't explain what was happening or how I felt. My parents stopped trying to make me come downstairs. They let me stay in my room with the door closed. I heard them talking quietly in the hallway sometimes, but they didn't bother me. The worry on their faces every time they looked at me made everything worse, so I avoided looking at them. 10 days after the incident happened, my dad came upstairs and knocked on my door. He said there was a news story about the home invasion, and my name had been leaked somehow even though I was supposed to be protected as a minor. He showed me the article on his phone. The headline called me a teenage babysitter who fatally injured an intruder during a home invasion. It described what happened in basic terms and mentioned that the investigation was ongoing. It said I was a local high school student but didn't name my school. Within an hour, my phone started buzzing constantly with notifications. Text messages from people I barely knew, comments on my social media accounts, messages asking if I was okay or if the story was true. Some people called me brave. Others said things that suggested maybe I went too far. One message said I was a hero for protecting those kids. Another one said the intruder was someone's brother and didn't deserve to die. I read about a dozen messages before I turned my phone off completely and threw it in my desk drawer. My mom suggested going to the grocery store together a few days later. She said getting out of the house might help, and we needed to pick up some things anyway. I agreed because I was tired of being stuck in my room. We drove to the store and went inside. I grabbed a cart and followed my mom through the aisles. We were in the cereal section when a woman I didn't recognize approached us. She looked at me carefully and then smiled. She said she recognized me from the news coverage. She told me I was a hero for protecting those children and that I did the right thing. Her voice was loud and other people in the aisle turned to look. My chest got tight and I couldn't breathe properly. The fluorescent lights seemed too bright and the woman's face was too close. My mom thanked her quickly and tried to guide me away, but the woman kept talking about how brave I was. I dropped the cart handle and walked quickly toward the exit. My mom caught up with me in the parking lot. I was leaning against our car trying to breathe. She unlocked the doors and I got in. We drove home without the groceries and I went straight back to my room. The next morning, my mom came into my room and sat on the edge of my bed. She said Siobhan had called asking if I would be willing to talk to a child psychologist who was working with Leo and Ava. The kids were having nightmares and the psychologist thought it might help them to hear that I was okay and not a scary person. My stomach twisted at the thought of talking about this with anyone, but I nodded and said yes. My mom squeezed my hand and left to call Siobhan back. 2 days later, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. I answered, and a woman introduced herself as the psychologist working with Leo and Ava. Her voice was calm, and she told me she just wanted to check in and see how I was doing. She didn't ask me to explain what happened or talk about my feelings. She just asked simple questions about whether I was sleeping and eating and if I had people to talk to. I gave short answers, and she didn't push for more. She thanked me for talking to her and said the kids would be glad to know I was okay. The call lasted maybe 10 minutes, and when it ended, I felt exhausted like I'd run a marathon. 2 weeks after the incident, my mom called me downstairs. Detective Kuznetsov was on the phone and needed to speak with me. I took the phone with shaking hands, and the detective's voice came through clear and professional. She told me that Tiago Contreras, the intruder, had died from his injuries without ever waking up. She said the case was now officially a homicide investigation, and the district attorney was reviewing everything to decide about charges. The word homicide hit me like a physical blow. I dropped the phone and my mom picked it up and finished the conversation. I walked back upstairs to my room moving like a robot. I climbed into bed and pulled the covers over my head. I killed someone. The thought repeated in my mind over and over. I killed someone, and no matter how justified it was, that fact was now permanent and unchangeable. I didn't get out of bed for 2 days. My mom brought food, but I couldn't eat it. My dad came in and tried to talk to me, but I couldn't respond. I just lay there staring at the wall, thinking about the fact that I had ended someone's life. My parents stopped trying to make me get up. They let me stay in bed, and I heard them whispering in the hallway about being worried. On the third day, Isaac came to the house. My dad made me come downstairs to the living room. Isaac sat across from me and explained that the district attorney could charge me with manslaughter if they decided I used too much force. Or they could decline to prosecute based on self-defense and defense of others. Everything now depended on Colin Armstrong, the district attorney, and how he interpreted the evidence. Isaac's voice was steady and factual, but I felt like I was underwater listening to him. He asked if I understood, and I nodded even though I wasn't sure I did. After Isaac left, my parents started researching trauma therapists on their laptops. My mom made a list of therapists who worked with PTSD and violent incidents. She called 3 different offices and made appointments so I could meet them and choose who I felt most comfortable with. I sat on the couch listening to her make the calls and felt nothing. The first 2 therapists we met seemed nice, but they talked to me like I was fragile and broken. The third therapist was named Elodie Tillman, and she worked specifically with people who had experienced or committed violence in self-defense situations. She shook my hand firmly when we met and looked me directly in the eyes. She told me that recovery would be long and difficult, and there were no shortcuts. She didn't treat me like I was about to shatter into pieces. I told my mom I wanted to work with Elodie. My first real therapy session with Elodie was 3 weeks after the incident. I sat in her office on a comfortable chair, and she sat across from me with a notebook. She asked me how I was feeling, and I said I didn't want to talk about feelings, because I didn't want to be the kind of person who needed therapy. Elodie wrote something down and then looked up at me. She said that refusing to process what happened wouldn't make it go away. She said trauma doesn't disappear just because we ignore it. I didn't respond, and she didn't push. She asked instead about my daily routine and what I was doing to take care of myself. I admitted I wasn't sleeping well and wasn't eating much. She gave me some basic strategies for managing anxiety and panic attacks. The session lasted an hour, and when it was over, I felt drained but also slightly less alone. During my second session, Elodie asked me to describe what I saw when I looked in mirrors. I told her I hadn't looked at myself directly since that night. She asked what I was afraid of seeing. I said I was afraid I would see a killer. She wrote that down in her notebook without correcting me or telling me I was wrong. She just nodded and asked me to think about why I connected my reflection with that word. I couldn't answer, and she said we would come back to it. The session ended, and I left feeling like she had opened something inside me that I wasn't ready to look at. A few days later, Isaac called my dad and said the prosecutor's investigator wanted to schedule another interview, and this one would focus specifically on my decision-making during the attack. Isaac came over that evening to prepare me. He explained that the investigator would ask aggressive questions designed to test whether my actions were reasonable or if I used too much force. He said they would want to know why I kept hitting Tiago after he fell down. He said they would ask if I considered running instead of fighting. He told me to answer honestly but carefully, and to think before I spoke. My hands started shaking while he talked, and my mom brought me a glass of water. Isaac said the interview was scheduled for next week at the police station. He would be there with me the whole time. I nodded, but inside I felt like I was going to be sick. I had to relive everything again and justify every decision I made in those terrifying minutes. I went back upstairs to my room after Isaac left and lay down on my bed staring at the ceiling. The prosecutor's investigator wanted to prove I went too far. They wanted to prove I was guilty of something. I closed my eyes and saw Tiago's face again, saw the blood spreading across the carpet, saw Leo and Ava pressed against the closet wall looking at me with terror. I opened my eyes quickly because the images were worse with my eyes closed. My phone buzzed with a text from a friend asking if I wanted to hang out, but I didn't respond. I couldn't pretend to be normal when everything inside me felt broken and wrong. The next week, I sat in the same small room at the police station with Isaac beside me and the prosecutor's investigator across the table. The investigator was a man in his 40s with gray hair and a notepad filled with writing from our first interview. He clicked his pen and looked directly at me. He asked why I didn't stop hitting Tiago after the first blow knocked him down. I felt my hands start shaking under the table and I pressed them against my legs to keep them still. I told him Tiago kept trying to grab me even after he fell. I said he was reaching for my legs trying to pull me down with him. I explained I was scared he would get back up and hurt the children if I stopped. The investigator wrote everything down in his notepad without looking up. Isaac sat perfectly still beside me watching the investigator's face. The investigator asked if I considered running from the room instead of continuing to fight. I shook my head and said no. I told him the children were behind me in the closet and I couldn't leave them there with Tiago and his friends. The investigator kept writing and his expression gave nothing away about whether he believed me or thought I was lying. He asked how many times I hit Tiago and I said I didn't know. I wasn't counting. He asked if I remembered the moment when Tiago stopped moving and I said yes. But I didn't stop right away because I thought he might be faking. Isaac finally spoke up and said I had answered enough questions for today. The investigator nodded and closed his notepad, and the interview was over. Isaac drove me home and told my parents the investigator was building a timeline of my actions and decisions. My dad asked if that was good or bad, and Isaac said it was neither, just part of their process. 1 month after the incident, Isaac called my dad and said a woman named Adelaide Schaffer had contacted him asking to meet with me. Isaac explained she was Tiago's sister and she wanted to understand what happened to her brother. My dad immediately said no, but I heard myself saying I would do it. Isaac strongly told my dad this was a terrible idea, and I should not meet with the victim's family. I got on the phone and told Isaac I needed to do this. I said I needed to face what I did. Isaac was quiet for a long moment and then said, if I was going to meet her, it would happen in his office with him present the entire time. We scheduled the meeting for the following week. I spent those 7 days feeling sick every time I thought about sitting across from Tiago's sister. The morning of the meeting, I threw up twice before my dad drove me to Isaac's office. Adelaide was already there when we arrived. She was younger than I expected, maybe early 20s, with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. She wasn't crying or angry looking. She just looked tired and sad. Isaac made us all sit down and reminded us he could end the meeting at any time. Adelaide looked at me and asked me to tell her what happened. She said the police wouldn't give her details, and she needed to understand how her brother died. I started describing the break-in, and my voice came out shaky and wrong. I told her about hiding in the closet with the kids. I described Tiago grabbing me and pulling me out. I explained hitting him with the bookend and him lunging at me and choking me. Adelaide cried quietly while I talked, but she didn't interrupt. Isaac sat beside me with his body tense and ready to stop everything. I got to the part where I kept hitting Tiago and Adelaide put her hand over her mouth. I finished by saying the other men ran away and left him there. Adelaide wiped her eyes and asked if Tiago said anything before he died. I had to tell her no. I said he never spoke except to tell his friends to get the kids. Adelaide nodded and cried harder. Adelaide took a few deep breaths and then started talking about Tiago. She said he struggled with drug problems for years. She said he had been in and out of treatment centers since he was 17. She told me about times he stole from their parents to buy drugs, and times he disappeared for weeks. She said she wasn't surprised he got involved in something like breaking into houses. She looked at me and said she didn't blame me for protecting myself. She said she was just sad that her brother made choices that led to him dying on someone's bedroom floor. I didn't know what to say to that, so I just sat there. Adelaide stood up and thanked me for meeting with her. She said it helped her to hear what actually happened instead of imagining worse things. Then she left and I heard her footsteps going down the hallway outside. I sat in Isaac's office feeling completely empty inside, like someone had scooped out everything that used to be there. Isaac waited a minute before speaking. He said meeting Adelaide was brave, but I needed to be careful. He told me not to take on guilt for Tiago's choices that put him in that house. I nodded, but I wasn't sure I could separate my guilt from Tiago's choices. They felt tangled together in a way I couldn't undo. 5 weeks after the incident, Isaac called my dad with news from the district attorney. I heard my dad answer the phone in the kitchen and then heard him start crying. My mom ran to him asking what was wrong, and my dad said everything was okay. Isaac had told him that Colin Armstrong decided not to file any charges against me. The DA's office said there was clear evidence of self-defense and defense of others. My parents hugged each other and cried with relief. My mom came upstairs to tell me, and I just sat on my bed staring at the wall. She asked if I understood what this meant, and I said yes. She asked why I wasn't happy, and I couldn't explain that happy wasn't something I knew how to feel anymore. The legal decision didn't change anything inside me. I still saw Tiago's face every time I closed my eyes. I still heard the sound of the bookend hitting him. I still felt his hands around my throat. My next therapy session with Elodie was 2 days later, and I told her about the DA's decision. She asked how I felt about it, and I said empty. She wrote something in her notebook and then explained that legal reasons for doing something and psychological healing were completely separate things. She said just because the law said I was right, didn't mean my brain would automatically accept what happened. She told me I shouldn't expect the DA's decision to make the nightmares stop or make me feel better about killing someone. I asked when I would feel better, and she said she didn't know. Everyone's timeline was different. 6 weeks after the incident, my parents thought I should try going back to the school. They said staying home wasn't helping me move forward. I agreed because I didn't have the energy to argue. The first day back, I walked into school and immediately felt everyone staring at me. Some kids came up and told me I was brave for saving those children. Other kids moved away from me in the hallways like I might hurt them. A girl I barely knew asked if it was true I beat someone to death, and I walked away without answering. By lunch, I was having a panic attack in the bathroom. I called my mom and she came to pick me up. The next day, I tried again and lasted until third period before I had to leave. Teachers looked at me with pity. Students whispered when I walked past. Some treated me like a hero and others avoided me like I was dangerous, and both reactions made me feel like a freak. After a week of trying and failing to act normal, my parents agreed to let me do independent study at home for the rest of the semester. I felt like I was giving up, but I couldn't keep walking through those hallways feeling everyone's eyes on me. I couldn't keep pretending I was the same person I used to be when everything about me had changed. My parents sat me down 2 days later and said they talked to the school about letting me finish the semester from home with independent study packets. My mom had called the counselor and explained I was having panic attacks every time I tried to go back. The school agreed to send work home and I could take tests in the counselor's office when I was ready. I signed the paperwork and felt like I was giving up on being normal. Other kids went to the school and dealt with their problems, but I couldn't even walk through the hallways without falling apart. My dad said it was temporary and I could go back next semester, but I knew everyone would remember what happened and treat me differently forever. During my next therapy session with Elodie, I told her about the independent study decision, and she asked how I felt about it. I said I felt like a failure who couldn't handle regular life anymore. She wrote something in her notebook, and then suggested I might benefit from a support group for people dealing with trauma from violent situations. I immediately said no, because I didn't want to sit in a circle with strangers talking about feelings. Elodie said the group wasn't about sharing feelings. It was about learning coping strategies from people who understood what trauma does to your brain. I told her I'd think about it, but I had no intention of going. She gave me a flyer with the meeting times and location anyway, and said I should come to one session before deciding it wasn't for me. 2 weeks later, I was having such a bad day that I drove to the address on the flyer just to get out of the house. The support group met in a community center conference room with uncomfortable plastic chairs arranged in a circle. 5 other people were already there when I walked in, and they all looked up at me. The group leader introduced herself and asked me to sit wherever I felt comfortable. I took a chair near the door in case I needed to leave quickly. The leader went around the circle asking people to share what brought them to the group if they felt comfortable. A man in his 40s said he was a veteran dealing with combat trauma. A woman around 30 said she survived domestic violence and was working on not being afraid all the time. A younger guy, maybe in his 20s, said he was in a bad car accident that killed his best friend. A woman in her 50s said she worked as a store clerk and got robbed at gunpoint 6 months ago. When it was my turn, I said I was dealing with trauma from a violent situation and left it at that. Nobody pushed me for details or treated me like I was special. The group leader talked about how trauma changes your brain and makes you react to normal situations like they're dangerous. Everyone nodded like they understood exactly what she meant. We did an exercise about identifying triggers, and I realized I had way more triggers than I thought. Loud noises, darkness, being alone, locked doors, footsteps behind me, raised voices. The list kept getting longer as I wrote things down. After the session ended, the domestic violence survivor came up to me and said the first meeting is always the hardest. She didn't ask what happened to me or try to make me talk. She just said she hoped I'd come back next week. During a therapy session 6 weeks after the incident, Elodie asked me to try something different. She said we needed to separate my protective instinct from the violence I used to act on it. I didn't understand what she meant at first. She explained that I could acknowledge I saved Leo and Ava while still struggling with how I had to do it. The two things didn't cancel each other out. I could be glad the kids were safe and also horrified by what I did to make that happen. She said most people think it has to be one or the other, but trauma doesn't work that way. I sat there trying to process what she was saying. She asked me what I would do if the same situation happened again, and I said I'd do exactly the same thing to protect those kids. She asked if that made me a bad person, and I said I didn't know anymore. She wrote something down and told me that protecting people I cared about didn't make me violent or dangerous. It meant I was capable of doing hard things when necessary. The violence wasn't who I was. It was what I had to do in that specific moment. I wanted to believe her, but it felt too simple. That night, I sat at my desk and started writing a letter to Leo and Ava that I knew I'd never send. I wrote that I was sorry they had to see what happened in their house. I was sorry I couldn't protect them in a way that didn't scare them. I wrote that I'd do it all again if it meant keeping them safe, even though I wished it hadn't been necessary. The letter got longer as I kept writing, and I realized I was clarifying my own feelings more than explaining anything to them. I wrote that I hoped they'd remember me as the person who played games with them and made them snacks, not the person covered in blood swinging a bookend. I folded the letter and put it in my desk drawer, knowing the kids would never read it. But writing it helped me understand that I could hold both versions of myself in my head at the same time. I was their babysitter who kept them safe, and I was also the person who killed someone in their bedroom. Both things were true, and I had to find a way to live with that. 3 days later, my mom called me downstairs and said Siobhan was on the phone wanting to talk to me. My stomach dropped because I assumed something was wrong with the kids. I took the phone, and Siobhan's voice was gentle when she said Leo and Ava were doing better in therapy. She said they'd been asking about me and wondering if I was okay. Siobhan said their therapist thought it might help the kids to see me again when I was ready. She was quick to add that there was no pressure and I should take whatever time I needed. She said the kids remembered me as someone who protected them, and they wanted to know I was all right. I told Siobhan I didn't know if seeing me would help or make things worse for them. She said their therapist could supervise a brief visit at her office if that would make me more comfortable. I said I needed to think about it and talk to my own therapist first. Siobhan thanked me for considering it and said to call her whenever I was ready. I brought up the invitation during my next session with Elodie. She asked if I felt ready to see the children again, and I said I had no idea if I'd ever feel ready. She asked what I was afraid would happen if I saw them. I said I was afraid they'd look at me the way they did that night, like I was a monster. Elodie said the kids had been processing what happened in therapy just like I had been. Their understanding of that night had probably changed since then. She asked if avoiding them forever seemed like a healthy choice, and I admitted it probably wasn't. She said I didn't have to decide right away, but I should consider that seeing the kids might help me as much as it helped them. I called Siobhan that evening and said I'd try a short visit if their therapist thought it was a good idea. 8 weeks after the incident, I drove to the kids' therapist's office with my mom in the passenger seat for support. Siobhan and Elliot were already there with Leo and Ava in the waiting room. The kids looked up when I walked in, and Ava's face broke into a smile before she seemed to remember she was supposed to be uncertain. Leo stayed close to his dad, but he was watching me carefully. Their therapist came out and brought us all into her office, which had toys and books scattered around to make kids comfortable. She asked everyone to sit wherever they wanted, and the kids sat on the floor near their parents. I sat in a chair across from them, feeling incredibly awkward. The therapist asked Ava if she had anything she wanted to say to me, and Ava looked at her mom before asking if I was okay. I said yes, I was getting better. She asked if I was still sad about what happened, and I said yes, sometimes, but I was glad she and Leo were safe. Leo looked at his dad and then at me and asked if the bad men were gone. I told him yes, they couldn't hurt anyone anymore. The police made sure of that. He didn't ask what happened to the man I hit, and I was grateful I didn't have to explain that part. He asked if I was still their babysitter, and I looked at Siobhan, who nodded slightly. I said I'd always care about them even if I wasn't babysitting them right now. Ava got up and came closer to me, asking if we could play a game sometime like we used to. I said maybe when everyone was ready we could do that. She seemed satisfied with that answer and went back to sit with her brother. The visit lasted 30 minutes, and it was less awful than I'd feared. The kids seemed relieved to see I was still the same person who had played games with them and made them snacks. I wasn't some scary stranger who'd invaded their house. Their therapist walked me and my mom out afterward and said the visit had been positive for everyone. She suggested another visit in a few weeks if I was comfortable with that. I said I'd think about it. In the car, my mom asked how I felt, and I said confused, but okay. The kids didn't look at me with terror anymore, and that meant something even if I didn't fully understand what yet. Elodie suggested I start with small steps back into normal life, and the first one was going to the grocery store with my mom. We went on a Tuesday morning when the store would be mostly empty, and I made it through the produce section before my hands started shaking. A man reached past me for apples, and I flinched so hard I knocked over a display of oranges. My mom helped me pick them up while I apologized to a store employee who kept saying it was fine. We finished shopping, but I had to leave the cart twice to go outside and breathe. The next week, I took a short walk around my neighborhood alone and made it 3 blocks before a car backfired, and I dove behind a parked truck convinced someone was shooting. I sat on the curb for 20 minutes before I could stand up and walk home. Elodie said every outing that didn't end in complete avoidance was progress, even if it felt like failure. She assigned me to meet a friend for coffee as my next goal, and I picked someone from the school who didn't know all the details. We met at a cafe and talked about normal things like classes and weekend plans, but halfway through I saw a news alert on my phone about a break-in across town. I excused myself to the bathroom and had a panic attack in the stall while my friend texted asking if I was okay. I came back and lied that I felt sick and needed to go home. The triggers were everywhere, and learning to manage them instead of avoiding everything felt impossible most days. 2 months after the incident, I was watching TV with my parents when a news story came on about another home invasion 3 towns over. The reporter described how intruders broke in through a back window while a family slept upstairs. I felt my chest tighten and the room started spinning. My dad reached for the remote, but I was already seeing the closet and the blood and hearing Leo crying behind me. I ran to my room and curled up on my bed, shaking and crying while my mom sat outside my door asking if I needed anything. The flashbacks lasted over an hour, and afterward I felt completely drained and hopeless. I texted Elodie even though it was late, and she called me back within minutes. She reminded me that setbacks were a normal part of recovery and didn't erase all the progress I'd made over the past 8 weeks. She said trauma recovery wasn't a straight line, and having a bad day didn't mean I was back at the beginning. I wanted to believe her, but lying in bed that night, I felt like I'd never be normal again. Elodie gave me homework to practice looking at myself in mirrors for short periods each day. She said I needed to start reconnecting with my own reflection instead of avoiding it completely. The first time I tried, I stood in my bathroom and forced myself to look up at the mirror above the sink. I saw a stranger staring back at me with dark circles under her eyes and a tight expression I didn't recognize. I lasted maybe 5 seconds before I had to look away. The next day I tried again and managed 10 seconds. I focused on my eyes and tried to find something familiar, but the person looking back felt like someone I used to know a long time ago. After a week, I could look for 30 seconds without feeling sick. I started noticing small things like the freckle on my left cheek and the way my hair fell across my forehead. Gradually, over the next few weeks, I started recognizing myself again, even though I looked different somehow. The girl who froze on the couch with a TV remote was gone, and whoever was in the mirror now had survived something terrible. I didn't love looking at my reflection, but I could do it without completely falling apart. 10 weeks after the incident, a letter arrived addressed to me with Siobhan and Elliot's return address. My mom brought it to my room, and I stared at the envelope for a full minute before opening it. Inside was a handwritten letter from both of them expressing their gratitude for saving Leo and Ava. They wrote that they knew what I did that night came at a huge cost to me, and they wanted me to know how much it meant to them. They said they were sorry I had to go through the legal process, and the trauma of everything that followed. Tucked inside the letter was a photo of Leo and Ava smiling at the camera in their backyard. On the back was a note in crayon from the kids saying they missed me and hoped I was doing okay. Ava had drawn a picture of 3 stick figures holding hands with a sun in the corner. I sat on my bed holding the letter and photo and cried for the first time in weeks. The crying felt different from the panicked sobbing after flashbacks. This felt more like something releasing inside me that had been stuck since that night. The letter helped me start accepting that what I did had value even though it traumatized me. I wasn't a monster for protecting those kids, and I wasn't a hero for doing what anyone would have done. I was just someone who got put in an impossible situation and did what was necessary to keep children safe. Elodie said that accepting the complexity of what happened was a huge step forward. She reminded me that I could acknowledge the violence of my actions while also recognizing they saved lives. The two things could exist together without canceling each other out. I started understanding that healing didn't mean forgetting what happened or pretending it was okay. It meant learning to carry what happened without letting it destroy me completely. 3 months after the incident, I returned to the school for my senior year with accommodations for my PTSD. The school counselor set up a plan that let me leave class if I needed to, and gave me extensions on assignments when I was struggling. My teachers knew what happened, and most of them were understanding when I showed up late or missed days. The first week back was incredibly hard because everyone stared at me in the hallways and whispered when I walked past. Some kids treated me like I was fragile and might break at any moment. Others avoided me completely like I was dangerous or contagious. A few people asked intrusive questions about what happened that night, and I learned to say I didn't want to talk about it. By the end of the first week, I was exhausted, but I'd survived, and that felt like a real accomplishment. I made it through each day even when it was hard, and I went home knowing I could do it again tomorrow. I kept going to weekly therapy with Elodie and monthly group sessions with other trauma survivors. I'd accepted that healing wasn't something I would finish and check off a list. It was something I'd keep working on probably for the rest of my life. Some days were better than others, and I was learning that was okay. Good days didn't mean I was cured, and bad days didn't mean I was failing. They were just different points on the same journey. The group sessions helped because everyone there understood that recovery wasn't linear. The veteran had good months followed by weeks of nightmares. The domestic violence survivor could handle triggers most days, but sometimes fell apart over nothing. We all supported each other through the ups and downs without judgment. 3 months after the incident, I stood in my bathroom and looked at myself in the mirror for a full minute without feeling sick or needing to look away. I studied my face and saw someone who had survived something terrible and protected innocent children in the process. My reflection showed the same freckle and the same way my hair fell, but something in my eyes looked older and more serious than before. For the first time, that felt like enough. I wasn't proud of what I'd done, but I wasn't drowning in shame anymore either. I'd killed someone to save 2 kids, and I'd spend the rest of my life processing that reality. Looking at myself for that full minute without hating what I saw felt like a victory I hadn't expected to achieve so soon. Siobhan called and asked if I wanted to visit Leo and Ava at their house, and I said yes before I could overthink it. My mom drove me over on a Saturday afternoon, and Siobhan answered the door with a warm smile. The kids were in the living room playing with blocks, and they looked up when I walked in. Ava ran over and hugged my legs while Leo hung back near his mom looking uncertain. We sat on the floor and played board games for an hour while Siobhan watched from the kitchen. The kids were comfortable with me again and asked normal questions about school and if I still liked the same TV shows. Nobody mentioned that night or what happened in their parents' bedroom. The house felt less haunted than I expected, and being there didn't trigger the panic I'd feared. When it was time to leave, Ava asked when I could visit again, and I said maybe next month. Leo gave me a small wave goodbye, and that felt like progress. 4 months after the incident, I was functioning in daily life with PTSD symptoms I could manage most of the time. I still had bad days where triggers sent me into panic or flashbacks kept me up all night, but I also had genuinely happy moments mixed in with the harder days. I laughed at jokes with friends and enjoyed meals with my family and looked forward to things happening next week. I'd accepted that I would always carry what happened that night, but it didn't have to define everything about me going forward. I was more than the worst thing I'd ever done, and more than the trauma I'd survived. Healing wasn't about erasing the past or pretending it never happened. It was about learning to exist alongside it and building a life that included both the darkness and whatever light I could find. I filled out my college application sitting at the kitchen table 5 months after the incident and checked the box for psychology as my major without hesitating. My mom asked why psychology, and I told her that understanding trauma helped me survive mine, and maybe I could help other people do the same thing. At my next therapy session, I mentioned the application to Elodie, and she nodded slowly while writing something in her notes. She said using my experience to help people were healthy as long as I didn't rush into it before I was ready, and I told her I knew I had years of work ahead before I'd be qualified to help anyone professionally. The conversation lasted maybe 5 minutes before we moved on to discussing my recent triggers and coping strategies. I'm not healed now and probably never will be completely, but I'm managing the symptoms and finding some kind of meaning in what I survived. I still have panic attacks when I hear glass breaking or see news stories about home invasions. I still avoid looking at myself in mirrors for too long because sometimes I see that blood-covered girl holding the bookend. But I also have days where I laugh with friends and enjoy normal activities and look forward to things happening next week. The girl who froze with the TV remote that night is gone forever and I can't get her back. But the person I'm becoming knows she's capable of protecting people she cares about when it matters most. That strength matters even when it came at a terrible cost that I'll carry for the rest of my life.